Hi guys. In landscape photography, you usually look for an image which is in focus all the way from just in front of your camera and all the way to back, in focus and sharp. So if you understand aperture and how to use aperture, you will have the basic understanding on how you can achieve that. But to explain, a shallow depth of focus, like we have here, this is shot with f2.8. Very small portion of the image is in focus and it gets soft really fast. So the part of the image which is in focus and what is sometimes called sharp is very shallow. And in landscape you usually don't want that. You want much bigger depth of field. Basically, like I said earlier, everything from your foreground to your background should be in focus and sharp. So it would be safe to assume that the higher the f-stop, the more of the image is sharp and in focus. Assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups. So don't necessarily assume something just because it makes sense. But before we go any further, I would like to take a brief moment to mourn. I lost my drone, Wendy. She got into a car accident and she died. And I will say that from time to time, I was kind of wishing that Wendy would die because I had my eye on a newer model. But I guess you didn't know. I guess you don't know what you have until you lost it, and now I just miss her. So I'm gonna take a moment of silence. That's enough. So let's move on. You see, in focus does not necessarily mean sharp. There are other factors to consider. So an f-stop of, let's say, f22 will give you more depth of field. More is in focus than, for example, f8, but not sharper. Here's an example. I shot two photos on the ice beach of exactly the same thing. First one at f8, the second at f22. I'm shooting at 35 millimeters and my distance from the lens to the ice is about 10 meters. Focused on the ice, so the results should be exactly the same. But as you can see, there is a massive difference in sharpness, but both are in 100% focus. It kind of feels like both photos should be exactly the same. So what happened here? Diffraction, that's what happened. So what does diffraction means? First, f-stop indicates how big your aperture is. The lower the f-stop, the bigger the aperture. Aperture refers to the opening of a lens diaphragm through which light passes. As you can see here, the lower the f-stop, the more space is given for the light to pass through onto the sensor, and the bigger the hole, the easier it is for light to travel through. Diffraction is the process by which a beam of light or other system of wave is spread out as a result of passing through a narrow aperture or across an edge, typically accompanied by interference between the waveforms produced. That was actually a mouthful, so let me simplify a little bit. Let's say this is my aperture at f2.8. The light has no problem traveling through this hole onto the sensor. But let's say this is my aperture at f22. Much more difficult for the light to pass through this tiny little hole. It will hit the edges and the light will spread and the light will bend and the quality of the light will deteriorate. Diffraction. Every lens has its sweet spot. Many photographers will say you're fine between f11 and f16. Others will say you're good between f8 and f11. Some people will tell you it matters if you are on a crop sensor or a full frame. This is not wrong, but this is not necessarily accurate. Generally, the sweet spot of every lens is around mid-range, lower than mid-range of the lens. But every lens is different, and well, the only way for you to know exactly where your lens's sweet spot is to check. And you can do that by downloading a target. You put a target on the wall, camera on a tripod, and then you shoot the target at every aperture you want to try, and download it to your computer and just compare it. Other way would be just to Google it. Google your lens, and there has been done many tests for every lens. I can almost guarantee you will find more than one result about every lens that there is. So my rule of thumb is I generally try to be between 8 and 11. 16 I use, but I try not to go higher than f16, because after that, diffraction becomes very noticeable. Does that mean I never shoot above f16? Of course not. For example, if I need to slow down my shutter, I'm at ISO 100. I have decided my optimal speed, and at optimal aperture, I'm overexposed. I could use a filter, but I don't have it. Then I just close down my aperture all the way to f22 or more if I have to. If you understand the exposure triangle, all this should make sense. If you don't, you might have a slight headache right now. You need to put in the work to learn and understand the exposure triangle, how ISO, aperture, and speed correlate to each other. If you don't understand it will slow your progress as a photographer down considerably. So it's not complicated, it's time well spent. So that's it. Now you should understand what diffraction is, and your photos should become much sharper if you adopt to this simple thing. All the things you can do, you can try to shoot at the lowest ISO, base ISO at 100 usually in most cameras. There are exceptions, of course. Shoot on a tripod, even if you're shooting at fast enough shutter speed, you're able to handhold it, it's always better to use a tripod. And expose to the right on the histogram. It really means that if you look at the histogram, the bulk of the curves should be on the right side, because that is where the information is. You have more data in your file. If you do that, there's more about this here in the corner. There's a video link here in the corner. Your gear is usually good enough. It's if you're thinking about upgrading your gear, think about lenses more than cameras. The quality increases considerably with better glass. Cameras, not so much. Your camera probably is good enough. There's probably no need for upgrade, but if you're anything like me, Needing is an entirely different beast from wanting. And if you want something bad enough, your mind starts to trick you and, into thinking that you actually need this. But if you have money to burn, buy everything. Do you have anything to add to this? If so, please do in the comments section if you have any questions or add something. Just, let's have a conversation about this. I hope you liked this video. If you did like this video and my other video, consider subscribing to my channel. Like my videos, share my videos, and comment on my videos if you like. That really helps me. This is free content, but by doing so, you are feeding the algorithm, and the algorithm will push my videos further, and that will help my channel grow. Thank you for watching. Bye.